Wales, a landmark law to increase the number of organ donors has had little impact 10 years after it was introduced. And I thought, well, that's quite strange, really, because they brought a law out, an opt-out law, where instead of having to register as an organ donor, it was presumed that you didn't mind your organs being donated unless you said otherwise. So I would have thought that would have had quite a big effect on the amount of organ donations. And I looked into it, and it looks like it actually did. It was actually quite successful, and there was a large increase in the number of organ donations. But then COVID came along, and then also the problem of ethnic minorities not wanting to donate their organs. The government are currently trying to bribe them with about £600,000 to have ethnic minority specified drives for organ and blood donations. But when it comes down to it, ethnic minorities are around half as likely to donate their organs after their death than white British people are. Which brings me back to the point that they are a massive drain on the NHS. We're repeatedly told that they're not, that the NHS is dependent on them, but realistically they are a drain on the NHS. And with organ donations, I'm not an expert in this, I'm just saying what I've read online, both in the past and doing a little bit of research this week. But organ donation, a lot of it comes down to, depending on which organ it is, comes down to blood group and race. So if you have an organ transplant from someone who's the same race and blood group as you, you've got a lot better chance of it being successful than if you've got one of someone else. But I was reading up that something like 80% of organs received by non-whites come from white people, because the vast majority of people donating organs and donating blood are whites. Again, things like this are reported as if they're the ethnic minorities are the victims in this. The fact that they're not willing to donate their organs after they die and not willing to give blood and things like that. And they try and spin it as if it's a failure in the NHS or a failure by white people and they're the victims of it, which clearly they're not. But again, it proves what a drain they are on the NHS, because people waiting for kidney transplants and things like that, and who are going through dialysis, obviously it can't be nice for them, and I'm not blaming the people waiting on organs for it, but it's a very expensive thing that costs a lot of money. And like I said, I think the NHS would be a lot better if it was a completely white country, or at least a massively majority white country. We wouldn't have these problems with a lack of organs and them having to be ferried around the country and things like that so they can have transplants. Yeah, the government are investing £600,000, I think it is, over 2 years to have ethnic minority driven organ donation campaigns. Similar to in the past, they've had campaigns pushing for ethnic minority foster carers and things like that, because black children are significantly more likely to land up in foster care due to various reasons: single parent families, criminality within families, and criminality among the youth, which obviously, although that does go on in the white community as well, it is a lot more prevalent in the black community. So in the past, they've had to have massive drives to recruit ethnic minorities, specifically black foster carers. So again, it's a massive drain on the economy, and they try to spin it as if they're the victims in it. And like I've said as well, even for the likes of Tommy Robinson and Nigel Farage, who are both, in my opinion, Zionists, most of their opponents, most of the people attacking them are Jews. Searchlight was set up by Jews. Hope Not Hate came out Searchlight, and it's very heavy with lots of Jews being involved in that. Again, Jews make up less than 0.5% of the population. So if there's more than one or two of them in an organisation, that they're massively overrepresented in that. And you've only got to look at any of these organisations. In America, they've got the Anti-Defamation League. And again, here we've got Searchlight and Hope Not Hate. And there's other organisations that push it and fund them and things like that. And also, it's kind of a bit of a segue onto my next point about Nigel Farage. He's now accused the BBC of double standards after racism allegations, which, to be fair, he is right. They are double standards. The double standard I would have raised would have been the Diane Abbott one, where she's allowed to put what she said in the past behind her without even acknowledging it was wrong or apologising, her comments about the IRA, because apparently they were years ago, although she was already an adult then. I believe she was an MP. If she wasn't an MP, she was a councillor. But she was someone who should, well, any adult should really be held to a higher standard of culpability than a teenager, as Farage was when he made these comments. I think he's more or less admitted to making the comments. It's now just down to the context in which they were made. But he's condemned the BBC and said that they should apologise for making programmes like the Black and White Minstrels and It Ain't Half Hot Mum. I suppose it is a good comparison in a way, but I don't think the BBC should apologise for those programmes. But it makes sense to raise them as a comparison for the way that they're complaining about Nigel Farage. But it's absolutely pathetic of the BBC, especially at the moment when they've got all this furore around what they did trying to stitch Trump up. So it'd be interesting to see what happens there. But again, Nigel Farage, similar to with Tommy Robinson, when he's accused of being racist, he likes to try and point out other people being more racist than him, rather than raising the important topic of anti-white racism and anti-British racism by people like Lenny Henry, Diane Abbott, Belle Ribeiro, Addy, and people like that. He prefers to talk about other people being supposedly racist against ethnic minorities, which, to be fair, like when they complain about the police being racist, when the police are having to deal with people, muggers and rapists and people like that on a day-to-day basis, it must be very difficult not to draw connections between the perpetrators of some of these heinous crimes and their race. Even black police officers, when they're getting called Uncle Tom or House, another word that I'll get in trouble for saying that they wouldn't get in trouble for saying, and things like that, surely they must start hating a lot of other people of their own race. It Ain't Half Hot Mum was hilarious. R.I.P. Windsor Davies. Yep. Yeah, I didn't watch that much. I think my parents used to have it on, but I was probably too young to really understand it, because I've seen some of them since, and I vaguely remember Windsor Davies as the Sergeant Major, and also he was in one of the Carry On films. Was it Carry On England? So yeah, it was a bit before my time, but I do remember it to some degree. Robinson comes out with as many Marxist buzzwords as Jeremy Corbyn. Yep, I'd agree with that. Especially when a few of his rallies and in a couple of promotional videos, he was actually playing anti-apartheid songs, which everyone's entitled to their own opinion of apartheid. In my opinion, and in the opinion of a lot of black South Africans, it was better than what they've got now. So, and it was the best system that they were likely to have. Well, how's the song go? The higher you build your barriers. I forget the name of the song, but it's a well-known anti-apartheid song, and Robinson's used that a few times. And his chant of black and white unite and fight, which obviously we know where that comes from. Oh, Max put it out there. Carry On Camping. Yep. Again, a lot of the Carry On films would probably get banned by today's standards, where they wouldn't make them. But I wonder, is there any of them that they don't show anymore? I know, like with even things like Fools and Horses and definitely Fawlty Towers, there's certain episodes they don't really show or are heavily edited. But the adoption rates or the foster rates do show that the black kids are far more likely to land up in foster care than white kids. So it's a massive hit on the economy for that, having to pay for that. And they've also brought it up. I'm going to say it was David Lammy bringing it up in Parliament. This is a good few years ago, and it might have been someone else. Again, I apologise if this is wrong. But they were complaining about that black children were more likely to get remanded in custody if they were arrested than white kids. And it was implied, or it was actually accused, of being racist. But again, back to my points earlier, when they're choosing whether to remand a kid in custody or release them to the parents, a lot of things like whether the parents bother to turn up in court, whether they've got a stable home to go back to, whether they're already in the care system when they're arrested, all of these things come into it. And I'm sure this day and age, if there's anyone working in the judiciary deciding on making decisions on whether black kids and white kids and anyone else gets remanded in custody, and they're doing it with a racially motivated anti-black agenda, I'm sure they would have been exposed years ago, and they would have been out of a job. In my opinion, the most likely reason for that is that black kids, not all black kids, but they're less likely to have two parents at home. They're less likely to have a stable place. That one or both of their parents may have also been involved in the crime that they're accused of. There's all sorts of reasons why they're a lot more likely to get remanded in custody, and it comes back to the same reason that they're more likely to land up in the care system for other reasons. TR has no problem with immigrants as long as they're not Muslim. Yeah, exactly. I saw right after the Southport murders, he went on an Indian. I've probably mentioned this a few times, but he went on an Indian TV program. I assume it's a TV program. It was shown on. I saw it on YouTube, and he was saying that it's only the Muslims that are a problem. We're lucky to have all these Sikhs and Hindus coming from India and other non-Muslim people, and again, the killer wasn't a Muslim as far as I'm aware. There's been talk that he was a Muslim because he looked at Islamic extremist propaganda, but a lot of people have looked at that same propaganda without being Muslims. Again, I don't know too much about it, but they was claiming that that's one of the things that the National Action lads were doing, looking at that. I don't know whether they were or not, but there's plenty of reason for people to look at terrorist training things and other stuff like that without actually being Islamic or having any sympathies with Islam. They're clueless, the sheep who follow Yaxley Lennon. I think they sort of fall into sort of two, maybe three camps, I suppose. Two, there's the people at the top with him who are making money. Obviously, they probably all know that it's wrong, but they're happy to do it because they know how to make the money. Now, I know that if I'd just gone, and I knew at the time as well, it's not just a matter of I've only just realised it now. When I first started doing YouTube videos, if I'd been the Zionist, pro-Israel, I'm sure they would have done a lot better than they have. I even had it years ago. I had a video that was going a little bit viral where I caught out a Metropolitan Police officer lying to people about what a protest was about. I think it was the DFLA, and the copper was saying that it was a far-right EDL protest. And I don't know if anyone's seen the video, but when I put the video out where I called him out that he was like lying, it started to go viral. And then a couple of people, I don't know if they was actually involved in the DFLA or just other people commenting on it, all of a sudden realised that I was anti-Zionist or at least against For Britain. And all of a sudden just got the hump and complained to me that they'd shared my video, and then not realising that I don't know if they said anti-Semitic or whatever, but basically they meant anti-Zionist, and had the hump with that. So I know for a fact that as far as like YouTube followings and things like that are concerned, my YouTube channel would have done a lot better if I was a Zionist. And then the people at the top with Tommy Robinson, they all know that. They know where the money is, and they not by their conscience, but by their wallet, they're doing the right thing. But then the people at the bottom, the people that are just followers, even the people that have donated money, really they've been duped. I think anyone like years ago we had the BNP, we had the NF when the NF was bigger in the 70s and early 80s, and then we had the BNP after that. And then from about sort of 2012 onwards, there's not been any large nationalist party that's genuine. So anyone who doesn't know anyone else, if someone's just sitting at home and they're just tired with the way the world and the country's going, but isn't in contact with other people, their first port of call from watching TV and looking on the mainstream internet is going to be Britain First, Tommy Robinson, or Reform. So, and then I think it's a bit of a learning curve from there. That's why they have quite a large turnover of people. Unfortunately, the majority of some people come over to our side, but unfortunately, the majority of people just sort of drop out after a while, after getting arrested for no reason or silly things like that. So, yeah, I don't really like to condemn the people that are actually just sort of followers, because I've had interesting conversations with quite a few of them and won a couple of them over and things like that. So I don't like to call them idiots or fools or anything, but some of them you do have to worry about. But I think anyone who's just getting involved in anything in the broad patriotic spectrum for the first time will automatically be drawn So when I first got involved, the BNP were the main organisation. The EDL hadn't been formed then. The National Front was still going, but was nowhere near as big as it had been. And the BNP was the main patriotic organisation and the first one that I got involved in. But I think anyone after 2012, some people might say 2010 or something like that, but around that sort of time, anyone after that would be drawn firstly to the EDL, then you've got the DFLA, you've got Britain First and things like that, because they're given so much publicity by the mainstream and the left, and they know what they're doing. I've called out some of these stand-ups of racism people before when they're organising against Tommy Robinson in October, and I said to them, I goes, you're not going to stop him, you know, and all you're going to do is draw attention to him and you're promoting him, and they don't care because they know he's a Zionist, so they'd much rather he get the attention rather than the NF or anyone who's genuine. That's why if we organise an event, rather than them promote it, what they do is they just organise key activists and try and sabotage it, even try and get an event cancelled, like a venue, or try and attack the event or attack people trying to attend it. So they know the difference. They know when they're genuinely against someone, what they do and how they behave, and they know when someone's a stooge to try and promote them by pretending that they're against them. If I know it sounds a little bit of a sort of double bluff or something to be to say that they're promoting Tommy Robinson and Nigel Farage when they're attacking them, but the way they do it, you can tell what they're doing. Even Nick Lowell's kind of said, was it Lowell's? Well, one of them from Hope Not Hate, it might have been Joe Mulhall, said that when Tommy Robinson stood for the Euro elections in, I believe it was 2014, no, tell a lie, I think it would have been 2019, what they did is they decided to treat him differently. And what they did is they asked all the newspaper outlets or media outlets not to give him any publicity, and they only campaigned directly in communities they knew that would oppose him, i.e. they did what they would do to us. But I think the one reason they did that to Tommy Robinson that one particular time is because he was actually standing in an election. So they wanted, and I don't think he has done since, so they sort of brought him down a peg or two. But when he's organising these massive protests in central London, Hope Not Hate could, I'm not saying it would be right to do this, but they could advise the media not to mention it and not to give him any publicity. And then the unions putting posters up around loads of people's works in London promoting the event could not do that, and the event would be a lot smaller, but they don't, because they want it to be a so-called success, a success that doesn't achieve anything, for the sheer point that it doesn't achieve anything. They're quite happy to have, I think they've claimed 2 million people or over 1 million people. It's most probably a couple of 100,000 people that were there in October. But even if it was a couple of million people, they prefer that than people actually being active and getting involved in anything that is actually genuine, standing in elections and things like that. Back to the Carry On films, yeah, doubt they show Carry On Up the Jungle now. Carry On had lots of blackface. Yeah, I remember, yeah, Carry On Up the Jungle and Carry On Up the Khyber. How would Spike Milligan fare today with his Packy Dalek sketch? I think basically anything, even more recent things. A lot of these woke millennials have complained about the American TV show Friends and Only Fools and Horses and things like that anyone would consider mild by even like 80s TV standards. So, which is one of the things really, like with all the talk about breaking the BBC up. I think the BBC's archives would probably be the best part of that. If they re-release some of the old programmes that they haven't shown for years, I think it'd be a lot better than the programmes they make now. I remember back in the early 2000s when the TV Times used to come out for Christmas, and there'd always be pieces in the paper complaining about the amount of repeats that are shown on the BBC and other channels over Christmas. But you don't get those complaints now because the repeats are the best things on the TV now. Anyone who's still, I don't watch TV anymore, I watch on demand services, but anyone who's still watching TV, they're most probably looking forward to the repeats more than they are the new programmes that are actually made. Sorry, but the truth hurts. White couples plan their children, obviously not 100%, but in the majority, where blacks bang out kids left, right, and centre. Yep. Even I was reading Diane Abbott's book, A Girl Like Me. I think it came out about a year ago. I got it as soon as it came out and I read it. And she was talking about her grandmother. I think she had, I could be slightly out with the figures, but I'm not a long way out with this. She had 7 children by 5 different fathers. And this was in Jamaica, and this must have been, well, I'm guessing her grandmother was probably like 50 years older than she is. So that must have been going on. This must have been going on like 70 odd years ago in Jamaica. Someone's having all these kids by different fathers, and it's considered quite normal. Apparently, according to her book, in Jamaica, you couldn't really get married until you could afford a tailor-made suit and this, that, and the other. But surely, if you can't afford to get married, you can't afford to have children. So it would have made a lot more sense to have waited to have had kids rather than have a load of kids by different fathers. And even so, even if they didn't get married straight away, surely she could have stuck with the same, or the fella could have stuck with her, whichever way round it was, stuck with the first fella, and then once they'd already had 2 or 3 kids, then got married. But no, they're obviously not all promiscuous. Some of them get married and have a stable family and things like that. But they're so much more likely to do things like that. And again, they tend to sort of blame other people for it. You often read these stories about single mothers struggling to make ends meet, and they're usually either a white mother with half-caste kids or a black mother and things like that. And the newspaper articles, I haven't read one for a while, but when they was quite prevalent a couple of years ago, they never got down to where the father was. There could be a genuine reason for it. The father could have died in a road accident, or could have been murdered for no fault of his own, or anything like that. Or it could have just been that it could have turned out he was a bigamist and he was arrested, and it wasn't the woman's fault. There could be any explanation for that, but they never gave the explanation, which makes me feel that it's just people trying it on. They've made poor life choices and blame everyone else, mainly the taxpayer, for it. In the past, I heard blacks or half-caste saying or complaining about all their baby mums. Yeah, again, that was, I don't know when I first heard the term baby mum. It's probably like about 20 years ago or something. It definitely wasn't a term that was common when I was at school. Even amongst the blacks then, I don't know how many of them were in single parent families or anything at my school, but you never heard talk about like baby mama or any of that stuff. Like among the white community, and I'm sure among some blacks as well, but it's considered terrible to be a deadbeat dad and not to look after your kids. I've never had children myself, so I'm not in either camp with that. I'm not super dad or the deadbeat dad, but I like to think, well, I know for a fact if I had any children, whether I was with the mother or not, I'll do everything in my power to see that they had every chance in life. A lot of these people just like to sow the wild oats and move on and make it somebody else's responsibility. I think David Lammy, in his book, his dad ran off when he was fairly young, and he blamed Britain for that. David Lammy, that is, not his dad. I forget his actual words, but it was something to do with living in Britain that he couldn't handle and whatever like that. But basically, it's our fault that his dad, who's black, left his mother. Nick Griffin was approached to turn the right in favour of Zionism long before they collared Tommy Robinson. Yeah, I believe Nick Griffin's spoken about that, how he was approached by them. But the Zionists have got a thing, they like controlled opposition, don't they? They like to control people in both camps. I'm sure most of them can't stand Tommy Robinson, but they're back him. They'd much rather that patriots follow him than anyone else, or anyone who's not a Zionist. I need to check if it's true or not. The Scouse gangster, criminal, whatever he is, was rowing online with Tommy and claims a lot of his EDL mates from the early days being nicked for sex crimes. Yeah, I know a few people, well, I don't know them personally, but I know of a few people from the EDL who have been done for sex crimes. But again, I think, to be fair, I don't really think that reflects on Tommy Robinson or any of the others, because people obviously weren't aware that they were sex cases at the time, and it makes you wonder why people like that choose to get involved with anything. I wouldn't be surprised if organisations like Hope Not Hate and such encouraging sex cases to join organisations to try and make everyone else look bad. Again, I've got no proof of that, but it seems strange that anyone would want to join. There was a guy a few years ago who apparently admitted to being an ex-lefty. He joined the BNP for a while, stood as a candidate, and then left. Joined the NF for a while, stood as a candidate, and then left. And then it turned out he was not a paedophile, but he was involved in domestic violence and other sort of things like that. And it seems strange that he'd want to join organisations that would want to change the law so that people like him hung. I can't think why anyone would do that unless they were being encouraged or blackmailed by someone like Hope Not Hate in order to do it. And to be fair, it's probably the same with the ones who are involved in the EDL, because I was never involved in the EDL. I know quite a few people that were, and none of the people that I knew would have condoned having people like that involved. So again, if you're involved in anything, you don't know who the people around you are. There could be people that are that way inclined, and all we can do is the best that we can to let them know that they're not welcome. If anyone is a child molester, a rapist, a drug dealer, or anything like that, don't join the National Front. Don't get involved in the National Front. We'd like to hang people like you, obviously by legal means, by changing the law, not any extrajudicial attacks or anything like that. But yeah, there's no reason why anyone would. And I think, to be fair to the EDL, I think they were probably. I don't think they was that much up there on bringing back the death penalty, but I don't think anyone that I knew that was involved in that would knowingly have anything to do with sex cases. I can think of two different people that I've known, not through nationalism, but from drinking in pubs. One of them was years ago when I was about 18, and the other one was a couple of years ago. Neither of them were anything to do with nationalism. In fact, one of them wasn't even white. One of them was like a Chinaman, but that both turned out to be paedophiles. But again, if someone's not openly talking about things like that, you've got no way of knowing. So it is quite a difficult thing. Obviously, the difference is with the Labour Party and things like that. You've got people involved with that openly talk about things, not doing things themselves, but they talk about lowering the age of consent. They want to push things in schools. They bring in laws to allow same-sex couples to adopt and things like that. And they're actually pushing things like that as part of their agenda. So that's why I believe that it's different. It's not hypocritical to hold them to account, but not hold people on the so-called right to account, because I don't think there's anyone on. I say the so-called right because it's the term. It doesn't really mean anything anymore. But I don't think there's anyone who's pushing these so-called homosexual rights and all these agendas aimed at kids, drag queen, story hour, and anything like that. I don't think there's anyone pushing anything like that. And if they were, people would tell them where to go and would have nothing to do with them. I think the only things slightly different to that was I think the EDL had a gay division or something like that. I apologise if I'm wrong with that. But even though it's not something I agree with, and definitely not something that I'd promote, that was, I believe, adults and nothing to do with things being aimed at kids. But like I said, the Labour Party have enacted things, and they've got people who have pushed agendas aimed at kids, and so that's why it's right to hold them to account for it. Latest accusation against Farage is he cheated at Conkers. Yeah, I wouldn't put anything like that past him. He seems like the type of person that would cheat at Conkers. Again, that photograph that he was meant to be at an NF thing years ago, it was long before my time. I might not have even been born then. I'm not sure when the photograph was taken. But I've spoken to someone that was around at the time, and that definitely wasn't Nigel Farage. So yeah, and I've pointed out online lots of times that we wouldn't want anything to do with Nigel Farage. Exactly, that's what I'm trying to say. White men in general look after their kids, where a lot of blacks, as you say, I don't know many, but a couple I do got loads of kids with different women. They don't like TR, but he's a useful fool, as they say. I don't know how foolish he is, because he's obviously making a lot of money. But yeah. Yes, I've been saying that for years. It seems every other person in the far right, according to Hope Not Hate, are either into CP, grooming minors, or Satan worshippers. It sounds a bit fishy to me. Yeah, it's possible there's the odd bad apple, but the Hope Not Hate rates don't seem realistic. It's like the lad that got out of prison recently. They tried blackening his name because he was mates with NA Jack Renshaw, but he obviously didn't know what Renshaw was doing. Doubt anybody did. Well, that's another thing with Hope Not Hate. One minute they're trying to say that everyone in National Action condoned what Jack Renshaw was doing, and then the next minute they're saying that he hid from them that he was homosexual. I don't know if he was or not. I've never met Jack Renshaw. I have heard some people say that he was fitted up and that he didn't do that, but like I said, I've never met him, so I can't say that he did. I can't say that he didn't. Labour love nonces. Remember Pie. Yeah, that's what I was actually thinking of earlier. The paedophile information exchange, which the Labour members of the Labour Party were. I can remember the two of them's names, but I'm not 100%, so I don't want to get sued for saying it. But there were at least two senior members of the Labour Party that were. I don't think they've actually proven to be members of Pi, but they was involved in another organisation that dealt with Pi. And I think one of the reasons they gave for doing it was to sort of stick it to the NF, because they knew the NF was against paedophiles, they'd support them or something like that, or the far right or whatever they said. But it's absolutely sickening. Yeah, the EDL had a Jew division and a gay division. Weird. And a Sikh division as well. I think the idea was that because they were basically an anti-Islam movement, specifically when it started against the Muslims that were protesting the returning British troops. So because they were an anti-Muslim organisation, obviously they was pro-Zionist and pro-Israel, so it made sense to them to have a Jewish division and to have a gay division. That's quite a similar thing to what the far left do as well, and other sort of leftist groups, like on the Palestinian marches, they have like a gay block and a Jewish block on them, which is probably a way of keeping all the gays away from the Muslims, or the homosexuals away from the Muslims. By having them in their own block, it probably makes it a lot easier to steward the event, I would have thought. Whether you like Farage or not, it's a Guardian-led attack. Yeah, exactly. I don't like Farage, but I don't like the attack either. I assume this one's about Tommy Robinson. Yeah, he's a successful grifter, granted, but if he was that clever, he wouldn't be getting nicked all the time. Last arrest, though, he got off. He left the UK with cash undeclared. That's illegal. Yeah, again with the arrests, they tend to be for fairly silly things. So, and that's a good way to grift money, because people look at it that he's being persecuted, that the state are trying to silence him, and all sorts of things like that. Although some of them, like the mortgage fraud one, obviously was nothing like that. But I think, and a couple of the, or at least one of the assault ones, but a lot of it's done in a way where he can pretend that he's been jailed for telling the truth, and that they're trying to silence him. I don't believe anything Hope Not Hate say. They lie so often. I'm surprised they don't get sued for libel. I tried to get a rock band they branded notorious Nazis to sue. Again, I think they're careful. They probably get legal advice on some of it, on what they can and can't say. And although we know them to be lying, it's difficult to sort of prove these lies. Like calling people notorious Nazis might sound libelous, and it should be libelous. But I think the way they'd sort of twist it is that because there's no actual Nazis around anymore, they may sort of try and spin that's sort of figuratively rather than factually, and that it's just sort of like a name to call someone. And again, although they probably would have a case I'm not a legal expert, but I would have thought they'd have some sort of case they could probably spin it round as if it was only meant in sort of satire or something like that would make the case at least not that straightforward. So if anyone did sue them, they could get stuck with a load of legal costs. I think the only time you can really sue them is when they actually say that somebody actually did something that they didn't. I've had it when they accused me of fly tipping in Parliament Square, a few of us went up there and we put a tyre around, well, we wanted to put it around Nelson Mandela's neck, the statue of him there. But because the statue's bigger than an actual person, the head's obviously bigger than an actual head, the tyre wouldn't go around his head, so we just put it in his hands. And we took the tyre away with us when we finished, and Hope Not Hate, or at least I think it was Matthew Collins, one of them anyway, claimed that we was fly tipping in Parliament Square, but we took the tyre away with us, so we hadn't fly tipped anything. But although it was me photographed in the photo, he knew it was me because I think he got it off my Facebook profile. He didn't actually name me, so it'd be harder to sue, or if I did sue, I'd be entitled. If I did so successfully, I'd probably be entitled to less money because he hadn't actually named me. Although you could see me in the photo, it's like it is an awkward thing. It's dirty business suing people because, like I said, you can so easily land up with a massive bill. And just because you are right, it doesn't necessarily mean that the court's going to find in your favour. Does anyone else think that there's more folk turning to true nationalism recently? I do, yeah. I think more people are tending to wake up, but then you've got other people sort of dropping out or dying and things like that. So it's an awkward one, yeah. I think there are more people waking up. A lot more people are in favour of repatriation or re-immigration or whatever you want to call it, because even though some aren't for an entire white ethno-state, they just want to repatriate large numbers. Farage won't do it. He'll talk about it. Tice will talk about it. They'll all talk about it, but they won't do it. It needs to be genuine nationalists that do it. Even the Labour Party are talking about lowering immigration. I think they actually have done a little bit. Again, nowhere near enough. Because you've got all this talk about by people like Lenny Henry that are talking about reparations for slavery. I know we spoke about this last week or the week before, but if there's, regardless of whether they deserve them or not, we know that they don't deserve them. But if there's enough of them here to have enough political sway, they'll get them, whether they deserve them or not. They don't care whether they deserve them. They just want the money. And again, I think Lenny Henry's now involved in a new political movement against racism and against Farage and this, that and the other. They're against the people, racists causing division. And the actual irony of that statement, racists causing division, when in fact they're bringing people here that don't speak English as a first language, are completely incompatible with our way of life and don't want to integrate. The majority of British people don't want them to integrate. They're pre-divided. It's not a matter of, oh, they'd all get on swimmingly with us if it wasn't for racists causing division. These people are completely incompatible and they know it. And even people like Lenny Henry, who's involved in that, is calling for reparations. Does he not think that that's divisive? You've got all these other things going on. You've got these black-only scholarships. You've got Black Pound Day. You've got Black Business Awards, Black Music Awards, Black Directories of Businesses. All these kind of things that they are doing. They are dividing as much, well, more than we are. They come pre-divided. They don't want to be part of our society. The majority of them, that is. They're just here on the take. It's not us causing division. That division is already here. That division has always been here, and it always will be. There's never going to be some integrated Britain, like the sort of thing that they're trying to sell to people. There'll be either repatriation where the immigrants go, or we will end up dying out. It's going to be one or the other. There's not going to be some utopia of integration. I've asked loads of people, what is the most successful integrated working class area in Britain? There isn't one. You could probably find some well-to-do places where all of the immigrants are doctors and lawyers and things like that. People get on a bit better there because they're the creme de la creme of their societies. But any working class, and again, they probably don't get on as well as they would have done when it was almost completely white. But any working class area, there is no area where it's multicultural and everyone gets along brilliantly. Again, I'm in Belfast, and where I live, everyone seems to get along brilliantly, well, nearly everyone, a lot better than it was in Croydon where I grew up. But that is because the majority of people are white British people. They don't get on brilliantly with people on the Republican side of things, and there's a lot of disruption with immigrants, but it is on a lot smaller scale than at the moment. It's on a lot smaller scale than it is in Croydon and London. But there's probably nowhere in the world where you've got a multicultural utopia. You've got to look at America, where they live in segregated areas, because people self-segregate. You can bring in all these laws and make it illegal to not want to sell your home or rent your home to a non-white and things like that. But when it comes down to it, most white people want to spend their time with other white people. Most blacks want to spend their time with other black people. Birds of a feather flock together. It's perfectly natural, and it's always going to go on. Even within your own racial group, people that are into football want to talk to other people that are into football. People that are into science fiction want to talk to other people that are into science fiction. People want to associate with people with similar interests and experiences than themselves. I know sometimes it is interesting to speak to people with other experiences. Obviously, you do learn a lot, but you don't want to be hanging around with people that are completely incompatible with yourself and your friends and your family, whether they're of the same race as you or a different race. It's just not natural, and people just want to pretend that it is. But like I said, it's not racists or right-wingers or Nigel Farage or anyone who's dividing people. People are already divided, and that is just the way it is. And people like Lenny Henry, if people weren't already divided, it'd be more people like Lenny Henry and others within the Labour Party pushing for reparations and things like that, pushing for preferential treatment, pushing for this, that and the other. They'd be the ones causing more division than anyone on what they call the far right. MI5 Robinson arrests are the MO for their agents. People think they wouldn't let an agent get arrested. I think when people talk about agents, I think there's a lot less actual agents than people think, whether you're talking about MI5, CIA or Mossad. I don't know how much it must cost. Hundreds of thousands of pounds per agent to run actual agents, because obviously they're going to be earning reasonably decent money. I don't know, 50 to 80 grand a year. I'm just guessing at that by other sort of professional sort of wages, what a reasonably ranked police officer would be earning and things like that. And then also they're going to need handlers, they're going to need equipment, they're going to need training, they're going to need various other things. There's going to be like a team of people working with them. Again, I know it's a film, but you look at something like Donnie Brasco or something like that. I know it's a film. It's based on a true story. A lot of the things in it weren't true, but the actual film's based on a true story about Joe Pistone, who went undercover with the Cosa Nostra in New York. But it must work like that. They must have people that they're passing their information off to. Other people must be assessing it. They must be getting permission to do different things. They must be liaising with other organisations and things like that. So I would have thought the wrong uns who are involved and who are subverting things are more likely to be what they have in the American cop shows. They call them CIs, don't they? Confidential informants, which is someone who isn't trained. It's probably a lot more expendable than an actual agent, and costs a lot less money. So I don't think Tommy Robinson would have had much money directly from, or anyone who is involved in anything like that, off handlers and things like that. They get the money off the people that are donating. That'll be where most of their money comes from. I think they probably get large donations to steer them in certain directions, but I would have thought the majority of their money comes from genuine people donating. This is back to the band thing. Hope Not Hate were calling Nazis. Yeah, the band they were talking about were a Swedish skinhead band, but not political. They offered to play for us free, and they called them Sweden's most notorious Nazis. It would be nice to sue them, but really the only people that could really sue them would be anyone who's got enough money spare that they can afford to lose it, that they're not going to like lose their house or something if the court case doesn't go their way. I offered to raise money for a libel case. The band were non-political. No idea where they got the Nazi stuff from. They do like to just brand people. They could probably find just a couple of silly things like some sort of social media post. And again, the word Nazi hasn't really got any proper meaning anymore. It's just thrown around, and it's like when they call people racist and things like that. It's got no actual meaning to it. It's the kind of thing that would be difficult to disprove. I've been called a Nazi loads of times. I'm not, but it's it shouldn't be, but it's just sort of par for the course in a lot of cases. 90% of asylum seekers are refused, yet we fund their stay until decisions. If they're knocked back in the UK, they go Ireland and vice versa. Yep, and they appeal their cases and they drag on forever. And even some of them are like given leave to remain, even though their cases have failed. About a week ago, Reform started a Friends of Israel group, and Richard Tice was the first to visit Israel. I'll have to look into that. If that's an official group, that'd be registered on the parliamentary interest. So that's another interesting one to look into. So put a giraffe, lion, tiger, sheep, bear in the same cage. What can possibly go wrong? Yep, exactly. A multicultural zoo. Did you see the supposed Republicans set up an anti-immigrant death squad, saying the sellout politicians legitimate targets? Yeah, I have seen about that. Yeah, I knew that. Yeah, back to the Donnie Brasco thing. A lot of Donnie Brasco was true. The Bananos were booted off the commission. I didn't know that. Lefty Pacino's character didn't get killed. I think he died of cancer, didn't he? He ended up going to prison and dying of cancer. Yeah, he was sent down. Sonny Black, the capo, was the one killed. Yeah, there's discrepancies as to what he was killed over, whether it was the Donnie Brasco thing or something else. Because there was another guy, I forget his name, who, because I'm quite interested in these mafia things. There was a different guy that first got Donnie Brasco involved, and then Lefty sort of poached him off him and Sonny Black. So I forget the guy's name, but there was him. I think Sonny Black got killed over something else, but he was killed. And apparently he did the bit where you see Al Pacino do it in the film, but it would have been Michael Madison's character, Sonny Black, who did it in real life, where he took the rings off before going because he knew he was going to get killed. But apparently, I think in the film he put him in a drawer, in a kitchen drawer or something, and in real life he gave them to a barman or something. Thanks very much for coming on, everyone. It's been a pleasure as always, and I'll be back the same time next week, 7:30 on Thursday, for another live stream. So thanks very much, everyone. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to next week.